right, welcome to the Pastor Speak podcast. I'm Aaron Smith, and today I have with me Jawanda Mast and Tracy McElhatton.
Good morning.
Jawanda Mast attends our Antioch campus with her husband Jonathan and her daughter Rachel. And since Rachel was born with Down syndrome, Jawanda has been an advocate for the disability community. She has spoken around the country on the topic and advocated for policy in the federal government. She's passionate about meaningful inclusion of individuals with Down syndrome and other intellectual disabilities in all aspects of the community and has presented at many conferences. Jawanda is a part of the National Down Syndrome Congress, and partners with other organizations. There's the Advocacy, what's the other one? Advocacy Coalition.
Well, that's part of the National Down Syndrome Congress. It's the National Down Syndrome, National Down Syndrome Advocacy Coalition. And that's we call it NDAC for short. And we have 1,100 advocates across the country that I give primary leadership to. And we work with them to learn how to tell their stories to impact change for people with disabilities, Down syndrome, and other disabilities.
Yeah, that's awesome. You just kind of took my next question about what is your role in the group. Is there any other things that you do part of that group?
Well, I do all kinds of things, but I'm a part of the policy team at the National Down Syndrome Congress. We have really a small staff for a national organization, but our policy team has 5 people. None of us are full-time. And all of us, 4 of us have a child with Down syndrome, and our other policy team member has a sibling with Down syndrome. It's not a requirement to work for us, it's just the way it worked out.
Yes.
And we are the most experienced policy team in the Down syndrome community and one of the most experienced policy teams in the country when it comes to disability policy. So I feel very fortunate to get to work with some very smart people. My specific role is I'm the grassroots advocacy manager. So as I said just a few minutes ago, I work with people here in Kansas, but I work with people all over the country. And I get to help them learn how to tell their stories so they can impact change.
That's really great. And it leads to the next question. I mean, could you share a story of someone with Down syndrome who, maybe who's been positively impacted by support and assistance, or maybe even how that story has led to change?
Well, yes, I can.
Yeah, you probably have a lot of stories.
I do have a lot of stories, and Aaron did let me know what some of the questions might be so I could think on them, and I thought on that, and I have about 100.
Yeah.
But I really kind of thought about, do I want to do something on Rachel, which I do a lot because she's mine and it's easy, and or do I want to do on somebody else? But we're going to do Rachel, and good. I'm going to assume a lot of people in our church, or there'll be people not in our church that'll be listening to this. I know a lot of people in our church do know Rachel and do know a little bit of this, but it's just such a great story about how one person can make a difference. We started advocating for something called the Achieving a Better Life Experience Act, ABLE. And that act we started advocating for it when we lived in Memphis. Okay. And what that act does, I'm going to go back. I had a prenatal diagnosis with Rachel by choice. So I knew she had Down syndrome before she was born, and I'm very type A, in case anybody didn't know that. And I wanted to know everything I could so we could be prepared. Well, I started hearing about this law that people said, well, there's this law, and you can't have any assets and you can't have any money, and there's a limit to $2,000. And I'm like, well, that can't be right. That sounds crazy. Well, guess what? That is right. And I started learning that pretty much the crazier, sorry for using that word, it sounded, the more likely it was to be true.
When you say $2,000, do you mean $2,000 in a bank account?
No, it is $2,000 in assets.
Okay.
So that means any money, really, if you're going to be getting public benefits, which many people with Down syndrome do, some don't, but the large majority at some point in their life, and the large majority of people with intellectual disabilities will get public assistance of some type. Mm-hmm. But it's $2,000 in assets. So if grandma and grandpa give you some savings bond, that counts against it. Yeah. If you earn money, it counts against it. You don't want anyone to leave you in their will because you could have problems. You spend money hiring attorneys that are specialized in this to help you figure out how to navigate this system. And at that time, the only option really was the special needs trust. And we're not going to go into special special needs trust because that's not my expertise. I can talk a little bit about it. But so I found that very interesting. And then shortly, I mean, Rachel was not even school age when I started hearing people talk about it. Well, there were a group of parents in Northern Virginia. This is a great story. There were a group of parents in Northern Virginia that all worked on the Hill. And they all got together and at a kitchen table, literally, and talked about this and sketched out what would go on to become the ABLE Act. Well, the National Down Syndrome Society at the time was doing a lot of work on government affairs, and so I got involved with their government affairs committee there in Tennessee, helped start a government affairs committee with the director of the organization in Nashville, and that's when we started advocating for this. So what we wanted to advocate for was that people with disabilities should be able to save more money than $2,000 a month and still protect. So how do you do that? Well, what they came up with, and it changed, we worked on it for 8 years and it changed every Congress. But what they came up with was 529 type accounts where someone like Rachel or others with disabilities with onset of disability before the age of 26, which that's changing January 1st to the age of 46.
Okay.
And there's a reason for that. But so we advocated for this law. We moved to Kansas in the middle of all this. So we moved to Kansas when Rachel was 9. And so we have no political connections here. We are not a family with money. So, but we have me, who is very persistent, and I know how to tell a story.
Sure.
And I thought, I know how to reach out to legislators. I've been doing that. I did that before I had a job with disabilities for some of the things I did. And I thought, I can do this. So Rachel and I started taking Rachel to the state capitol in Tennessee and to visit legislators in Tennessee when she was a tiny little thing.
Yeah.
So Rachel and I started reaching out to our congressman, who was Kevin Yoder at the time, and our 2 senators, who were Jerry Moran and Pat Roberts at the time. And we started going to Washington, D.C. every year, usually on our own dime. And we would go to the Hill with others from across the country in the Down syndrome community and advocate for this bill to be passed. Well, Rachel is really your secret weapon in this because she is a good little advocate. And even at the age of 9, she could go in an office and say, would you please sponsor the ABLE Act because I want to have things in my future. But what she became famous for, we had gone to see Jerry Moran, and that was the first or second time, Senator Moran, it was the first or second time we'd been to his office. And Rachel, we were finished up. We always have a script and we have other people with us. We don't follow a script, but the things,
You have a plan.
a plan and a couple of things we want to ask him to support. And Senator Moran has been supportive in many ways.
Okay, good.
And we're getting up to leave, and Rachel turns her little 9 or 10-year-old self around and says, Senator Moran, you need to sponsor the ABLE Act because I want to grow up and get married and live in a pink house.
Love that.
It was great. You could not have scripted it better. And everyone in the room laughed, and Senator Moran signed on as a co-sponsor. Senator Roberts eventually signed on as a co-sponsor. Congressman Yoder was an early sign-on. Kind of the same story that Rachel asked him. He will tell you he knew nothing about the ABLE Act. And all 3 of them will still tell you, I have a recording from Jerry Moran on my phone from the law passed. But they will all tell you that one of the main reasons they got involved is because Rachel and her family came and told them the story of how that impacted them. So the law goes on to be passed and signed into law in 2014. Rachel got to open the first ABLE account in the state of Kansas, and she is now able to save money in that, and it doesn't jeopardize the benefits she has as adults. And I know we want to talk about that later.
Sure.
I know that's a long story, but it's a great story. But we have gone on. You pass an act. I tell advocates, there's the law you want and the law you get, and it's almost always the law you get. And then you work to improve it. And that's what we've done with ABLE. They have passed numerous improvement bills, like an ABLE to Work bill, where people who work can put more money in that if they don't have a retirement account at their job. And most people don't get retirement. Rachel does. There's another great story about something that happened because of that, but that's actually not a good thing that she gets retirement. We can pick that up later. But this age 46 was one of the changes. In the original law, it was supposed to be age 46. But it was changed to 26 at the last minute, primarily because the cost of the bill was going to be so high, they didn't think they could get it passed. But the bill passed with one of the most bipartisan, overwhelming votes in the history of Congress.
That's amazing.
93 of 100 senators signed on or voted yes. I can't remember in the House I think it was 418 to 17 or something like that when it passed. So overwhelming bipartisan.
That's good.
That's another thing that I'm glad I mentioned to say. Our organization is a nonpartisan organization, and we believe disability is a nonpartisan, bipartisan issue. And it always has been. Most laws that have been passed that benefit people with disabilities have been passed with support from both sides of the aisle. And with the President Ford signed the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, which is one of the most profound acts that has changed the life of people with disabilities around this country. But I believe both chambers, the House and Senate were both controlled by Democrats at the time. So that's a great example. And pretty much all of the really good policies have been bipartisan.
Yeah,
so
that's awesome.
Yeah.
I'm glad it was. You mentioned stories, how they've impacted change, but I've just had a side thought while I was preparing for these. Why are stories so powerful?
I think I've always believed stories are powerful. When I was growing up, I wanted to be a famous writer. And I started out in journalism college and changed my major, but I've always loved telling stories. And it's become really popular in the last, I would say, 10 or 15 years to focus on stories.
Yeah.
And I would be interested to hear what Tracy has to say, too. But I think our stories make impact because they give us empathy. And they help us to put ourselves in other people's shoes.
Yeah.
I've had so many opportunities with friends who would say, we don't understand why this bill or why this policy might be bad for Rachel or someone. Can you explain that to us?
Yeah.
And when I explain how it impacts Rachel, who they know and love and would never do anything to harm her, they rethink, maybe I should look at that through a different set of glasses. So
okay.
I think it really helps you. And in policy work, I mean, these legislators will tell you those personal stories, their staff. We do these trainings and we sometimes get staff or elected officials to come and speak. We don't tell them what to say every time they talk about tell your personal story.
Yeah.
Because your personal story is what impacts change.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I would say it just personalizes a message that you want to get across. I know Derek tells this story sometimes, but when we were talking through immigration about 13 years ago or so, it was very other and just not very personal until it came to Blue Valley. And we had a member that was deported. And so we began to see how that impacted individuals and how those policies hurt people or just were harmful. And it made a difference in how people viewed certain policies and certain actions and groups of people. And just that personal story just really drives it home and helps you contextualize and make a change.
Yeah. Yeah, I love it. I love hearing stories. So thank you so much for sharing some of yours. Let's turn our attention towards the disability community right now. So, could you describe the current state of that community?
The disability community is very afraid right now.
Okay.
I think afraid is, and not wanting to overreact, but it's kind of hard to not overreact. There's been many, many years spent trying to build what infrastructure we have for people with disabilities.
Yeah.
And it feels like so many of those things are being torn down now. And so there's fear, there's a lot of anger in the disability community, especially by people that have spent many, many years advocating, and they feel like a lot of their rights or a lot of the things that have been in place to protect their rights are being torn down. Okay. So we at our organization spend a lot of time trying to teach our advocates how to reach out and make their stories, make their needs, how's this going to impact, and make it known. We also work with people, other disability groups across the country, Down syndrome groups, leading groups like the ARC. I have done some, not as much state advocacy as I have federal advocacy. But right now, there's so much about taking everything back to the states. We're doing a lot of work on helping families, advocates understand how to plug in on the state level.
Okay.
And we really encourage people to work with some of the other groups. I work a lot with Disability Rights Kansas. I cannot say enough good things about them. And there are some other really strong organizations here in Kansas. In another state, it might be another organization. So we really work with our advocates and families to help them learn how do you work with other people, because there's power in numbers as well. Sure. Mm-hmm. But there's a lot of fear, but there's always hope. I mean, we tell people advocacy is a marathon, not a sprint.
Yeah.
And that's true. You're in
it took 8 years to get that one, the ABLE Act, right?
You're in it for the long haul.
Yeah.
And somebody told me one day, one of our advocates said, I'm just tired of this. We've introduced this in 2 state legislatures and it's been voted down. And I'm like, oh, that's nothing.
It's the beginning.
It is, and it can be weary. You get weary telling some of your stories over and over again and not seeing change in some things. And then sometimes seeing things that may not be the best. And I think a lot of people in the disability community don't understand why they feel like people may be trying to take their rights away. I have a little bit different take on that. I don't think people are intentionally trying to do things to people with disabilities. I think there's a lot of unintended consequences. So,
okay, yeah. I mean, I think the general populace, just in our country, is fed, fear and anger from a bunch of different sources, mainly social media. And Derek could just rant on that for several hours. Yeah, I mean, that's really interesting that they have this fear and anger, but you're also like trying to feed hope and remind them that this is a long haul kind of thing. Like we're in this for the long game. We're playing the long game. So could you tell me like how maybe a national policy has affected individuals? You talked about like some of the fears. Could you give us specific about how it maybe something that an unintended consequence of a new thing is?
An unintended consequence. Let's talk about Medicaid, for example.
Yeah, good. Okay.
You can't. You mathematically can't cut $930 billion from Medicaid and not have an impact on people with disabilities as it trickles down. And
how does Medicaid benefit people?
Oh boy,
I know it does, but how?
Medicaid is insurance for the poor and disabled. Now, we'll use Rachel because that's what I know best, okay? Yes. Rachel did not qualify for Medicaid in Tennessee or here in the beginning because it was based on our income. And we have good insurance, or had good insurance, but that's not true for everybody. And there are a lot of people that have to quit their jobs to be able to take care of their children with disabilities, whether their children with disabilities have a lot of medical issues or not. Of course, some that have medical issues do have to quit, and they lose some of that income, and they may or may not qualify for Medicaid because the thresholds on income are pretty low. But so that is one thing that people may not understand, that you have one of your people in your family has lost income. When I said they may or may not have a medical issue, here's a good example. So not every daycare and not every preschool will take children with Down syndrome or disabilities. And we have many families that end up having to have somebody not be able to go to their job because they don't have anywhere that their child can be.
Yeah.
And that's a problem in our community, and it's a problem in our churches because a lot of preschools, when we lived in Memphis, there were many, many preschools, and we didn't have preschool here. There were many, many preschools that they might not directly tell you they wouldn't take your child with Down syndrome or disability, but they found ways not to take them, like they're not potty trained. People with Down syndrome and disabilities may or may not be potty trained at 3, when we have all decided that that's when people should be potty trained. And
tell my daughter, please.
Yeah, I mean,
also mine.
Yeah, it's not just people with Down syndrome, but it is one of the ways that they can keep you out. So I have a friend here who professes to be an atheist. She had her son signed up for a preschool here. She called me one day in tears. She's an attorney, single mom. She called me in tears because the preschool that is at a church that everyone will recognize the name of if I said it, called her a week before he was supposed to start there and said, oh, we can't take him. And they knew he had Down syndrome. We can't take him because he had Down syndrome. Mm-hmm. And my heartbreaking conversation after that with her was, why do Christians treat us this way? Yeah. And that's really hard because, I kind of agree with her on that we got to figure out a way to make that better. But back to Medicaid. Yeah. Okay. Medicaid. So the thing that people really don't understand about Medicaid is something called the Medicaid waiver. Medicaid insurance, and I'm going to not use exactly the right terms, but I think they help people to understand. Medicaid insurance is an entitlement. So if you qualify for that, you qualify for that. So if you're in Kentucky, you may have to reapply in Kentucky, but you still get it if you qualify. That's an entitlement. The state, federal government, state has to provide it. There's something called the Medicaid waiver. The Medicaid waiver is usually optional waivers in states, and there can be many. I don't know how many there are in Kansas, but one in Kansas that's particularly important to us is the IDD, which is the Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities Waiver. It's also called, we have the longest names in the disability community. It's also called the IDD HCBS, which stands for Home and Community-Based Services Waiver. So one of the reasons we moved to Kansas when Rachel was 9 is because we knew if we moved to a new state, we go to the bottom of the wait list for the waiver services. And
hear what she's saying, though. Like, how long were you on that wait list?
We were on the wait list for 10. Well, actually, we were only on for 8 years, but now it's 10. Okay. So home and community-based waiver services are services that help people with disabilities to live and work independently in the community. We'll use Rachel as our example. We are very fortunate. Rachel has been fairly healthy, and I think Tracy would agree. You can usually kind of get her to do what you want her to do. I mean, she's usually going to be cooperative, and she's fun and outgoing and all that kind of stuff. So we're very fortunate because not everybody, some people have much higher support needs than Rachel has. But so for Rachel to be able to live and work independently in the community, she may need supports. She needs transportation, which the Kansas waiver does not cover, might I add. It's I really have a thing about that.
Are you advocating for that?
Oh, yeah, but that's a story for another day. But the waivers are different in every state, too, because they're an optional waiver. So the state figures out what's going to be included in their waiver, and it has to be approved by the feds. But it is still, primarily the states determine. So they all look a little bit different in every state. But they might provide job coaches. They might provide personal assistants that can help you to be able to live in your apartment or to live in your home or whatever it may be. Lots of things that the Home and Community-Based Waiver Service provides to adults. Without those funds to support that, people with disabilities, many could not live and work independently in the community. If Rachel lived out on her own and not with us right now, she still lives with us. We hope she's going to move out on her own. She would need people to help her to be independent there. Most adults with disabilities will need some sort of waiver services. Okay. Well, when you cut Medicaid or block grant Medicaid and send it back to the states are already underfunded. So they're already struggling to figure out how they're going to provide these services. So you send it back, and so in a very simplistic form, we think an unintended consequence may be that, because this is usually what happens, that when it goes back to the states and there's not enough money to do, you have to provide the entitlement Medicaid. So this child needs heart surgery, so they're going to get that because, and absolutely they should get that. But another child needs home community-based services like job coaches or things like that. That's where the cuts are going to come in because those are considered optional and the government does not have to, or the state does not have to provide that. Okay. That's not true in every state. There are a few states. That's the way it is on the federal level. There are a few states that have passed laws to make Medicaid waivers entitlements, as I call it. And again, I may not be using the correct terms that I think people understand that. So like in California, there's not a wait list for their services. Kansas has a 10-year wait list. Last I heard, the state of Texas has like 280,000 people on their wait list. They don't even give you a number. I'm not sure what Tennessee's is. There are some states that don't have wait lists. North Dakota, I don't really want to move to North Dakota, though I do have a good friend there. But you can't. Then let's talk about the moving. So if you have a child with a disability, you go get on that wait list as soon as you can. We tell families that all the time. We were on the wait list in Tennessee. We moved here. One of the first things I did was went and got Rachel on the wait list because I knew because I'm educated. And as hard as we try, not everybody knows. You got to get on that list because when your child gets older, you're going to need those services. And parents tell me all the time, well, we're not going to need that. So I'm not going to sign up. And I'm like, oh, please go sign up.
You may need it in 8 years.
Well,
10 years.
and 8 years later, guess what? They call me and say, oh, Jawanda, we didn't sign up. What do we do? So you go sign up.
Yeah.
But if your family needs to move because one of the parents gets a new job and you have to move to a new state, guess what? You get to go to the bottom of the wait list and start over.
Yeah.
So if we left here and went back to our home state of Arkansas, I don't know what the wait list is in Arkansas now, but we would go to the bottom of their wait list for Rachel to get services.
Yeah.
Military people. So a huge issue for military families because military families get moved
Constantly
a lot.
moving.
And they're constantly moving. So they're constantly, if they need waiver services, having to figure that out in the new state. Every state has a little bit different laws. And then you also have education issues that you go somewhere new, you got to navigate that system. But the Medicaid waiver system is one of and we're very concerned, and an unintended consequence with some of the Medicaid is also the direct care professionals or support professionals. We already have a lack of people. We don't have enough people to provide direct support. Very low pay, don't have insurance in a lot of cases. Many of those people and some are on Medicaid expansion in other states. Kansas doesn't have Medicaid expansion. They could lose their insurance, or there can be some of the rules that will make it so they quit their job because they need to qualify. They don't qualify. Their little bit of money they make is still a little bit too much.
Bit over the threshold.
Which happens to a lot of people. Yeah. So that was a big, long ramble for you. It's complicated.
Yeah.
It's very complicated.
Well, I didn't know about the waivers that you were just talking about. I had no idea.
Most people don't.
Yeah. I was also thinking about like minors in the education system. So how does the education system impact minors with Down syndrome or mental disabilities?
Well, children or students with disabilities, IDEA, I mentioned it earlier. Tracy could probably give us a lesson in this.
Oh, I haven't been in special ed law in quite a few years, but yes, the federal government has passed IDEA, Individuals with Disabilities in Education Act, and that is the bill that provides for services in schools. It provides the funding for services in schools. It also provides early intervention. So if you have a child 0 to 2 and they have identified disabilities or just a developmental delay, whatever, they are served by Part C of IDEA, and that is overseen. The funding comes from the federal government, it's given to the states, and then they provide services state to state. Part B is for kids 3 to 21, and that is provided for by the school district. The funding comes from the federal government. We are not fully funded in Kansas. Not very many states, if at all, I don't know, are. But that IDEA is what provides for and guarantees a free, appropriate public education in a child's least restrictive environment. And without that, there's no accountability for educating students with disabilities. So.
I will say they provide part of the funding. The states and the districts provide most of the funding, honestly. But the federal law, we're celebrating 50 years of IDEA this year. Okay. And it was passed 50 years ago. It was advocated for parents like me, and I get goosebumps every time I talk about it because I'm eternally grateful. Yeah. Because if we had not had IDEA, Rachel would not have had a right to a free and appropriate public education in the least restrictive environment. And it's because of that law and the protections in it that we were able to advocate for Rachel to be included in the general education classroom, which is her least restrictive environment, and she got to graduate from her high school with a diploma. But the other thing, IDEA, their promise was that the federal government would fund it at 40%. I think it has once or twice been at 20 or 22%, but I believe this year it's under 14%. Well, it's a federal law. You're mandated to do this, so you have to do it. So that leaves the districts and states to have to make up the difference.
Okay.
You know, a lot of people talk about wanting to send IDEA back to, all of that to the states. Again, we're back on the states. Well, number one, I philosophically and personally have issues with that because the states did not educate children with disabilities until they were forced to. A federal law had to be passed.
Yes.
So many, my organization just did a frequently asked questions about moving or getting rid of the Office of Special Education Programs, because most of the people that work there have been fired in the last 2 weeks. And we just did an FAQ on that. And one of the things we talk about is if you send this back to the states, there are many states that aren't, well, the states didn't educate our children until a law was passed that said you have to educate them. Yeah. Millions, and I think the numbers are in that document, millions sat at home or were institutionalized. So Rachel was born, and I have friends that have siblings and aunts and uncles that have disabilities before 1975, and they talk about how fortunate we are that we have this law. And I get goosebumps talking about it because it's made not just for Rachel, but students everywhere. But the state of Kansas in particular hasn't funded their statutory responsibility to special education since 2011. So you've got money problems everywhere you look. But I personally and professionally don't want to see IDEA sent back to the states because I have a concern that they will actually, nobody's going to be held accountable.
Yeah, there's no mechanism for accountability.
If you're not being held accountable, you may not. And I will be the first person to admit, and Tracy and I were talking about this earlier, I'll be the first person to say this is not a perfect system. It needs improvement. But improving it is not tearing it down. It is improving on what we have in place that we know can work. Another piece of IDEA that a lot of people don't realize is Part D. Mm-hmm. That provides technical assistance. So to help teachers, to help organizations figure out how to serve children with disabilities in many different ways. But one of the things that was most helpful to me from this Part D funding is parent training and information centers.
Okay, sure.
Every state has to have at least one parent training and information center. That parent, it's called a PTI.
That doesn't seem like it's enough. Like just
at least.
How far would I have to travel to find the one in Missouri or the one in Kansas? Right.
Well, the one in Kansas is in Topeka.
Okay.
And they do a really good job. They're called Families Together, but of course they're understaffed.
Yeah.
But they are there to empower families. That's their.
Sure.
I mean, that's their goal. So you can call them if you have an issue that you haven't been able to resolve or a question, and they'll try to help you. Where that made a real difference in our world, we were living in Tennessee when Rachel was little. She was born in Tennessee, as I mentioned, and we had a great parent training and information center.
Okay,
and the one here I think is very good too.
Sure.
I have worked with them some, but not as much as I did the one in Tennessee. Well, one of the great things about our early intervention program that mandated by federal law was not only we were in a group family center group setting because that's what we chose.
Yeah.
We wanted Rachel, she's an only child, so we wanted her to be with other children, and we were in a group with other children, and they rotated through occupational therapy, physical therapy, speech therapy, developmental therapy, which is cognitive usually. But then the parents also had the opportunity to go to parent support during the time they were there. And one of the things they started doing when our children turned 2 was educating us on the federal law and the state law rules and regulations. Well, I loved that, but that's where I learned. I mean, that's people ask me, how did you know this? And I'm like, because I learned it when Rachel was in early intervention. And so I have directly seen the impact of that. And so that's one of the things also that is covered under IDEA that makes a huge difference for families of children with disabilities.
Yeah. Man, that's a lot of information. For someone who's ignorant of these things, what would it look like for someone, me, ignorant, to advocate? What does advocacy look like for someone like me?
Advocacy can be on all levels. It can be all kinds of things. And there are people that are going to advocate at their local level. May sound silly, and it's not really policy advocacy, which is what I do, but it's a lot of times what I tell people. I used to send a Christmas letter every year, and I stopped doing it. It was called Jonathan Jawanda, a modern day tragedy, chapter, whatever. And I stopped doing it a few years ago because I got tired. Anyhow. But one of the things I said in that after Rachel was born was, even though we have so many wonderful people in our world, so many friends, a lot of people feel like they lost their friends, their families, turn their backs on them in some cases, or they just don't feel like they understand. And we have not had that. We've been so embraced by people. But you know what I would say in my letters? You may not live where we live, but you know what? Ask at your school if your child can be in the classroom with someone with a disability, someone with Down syndrome, someone with a disability. And several of my friends have sent me stories about how their children that don't live here and that don't see Rachel very often, but they have reached out to people with disabilities or Down syndrome in their classroom and invited them to do things. So one of the things somebody could do would be to ask can my child be in that class? But then teach your child and yourself and your friends to include those children. And sometimes that may look different. You may have somebody, and that may not even have a disability, but you may have somebody that has a sensory issue. Many, many children have sensory issues, probably higher incidence in children with disabilities. The little bit of the cognitive delays they have may make it harder for them to do some of the activities. Ask that parent, go to that parent and talk to them and find out. But we all want to be included. We all want to be invited to lunch. Yeah. So that's one of the things that you can do. You can advocate at your local PTO or PTA, whatever it is. I was stunned when we came here and the special education teacher told me they were giving gift cards to all the teachers, but they didn't give gift cards to the resource special education teachers. And I was like, what's that about? So I advocated for that. And the special ed teacher said, we never got anything before you came, Jawanda. And I'm like, that's just that I should not have to do that. That should be a given. Someone should figure that out. Yeah. But that's one of the things. I mean, that's an easy thing you can do. But if you want to get more involved, then sign up and learn about disability and disability law. And there are a lot of ways you can do that. You can sign up for our action alerts. We have an action alert system, and we only send those out when there's something really important we need you to act on. But it always gives you background, education, what you need to know about this. It gives you a model letter that you can send. Okay. And a lot of organizations have those. You can use those to try to find out.
How would I sign up for that? Is that an email?
It's an email.
Email newsletter
and
or something?
For us, you would go to ndsccenter.org and look under policy and advocacy, and it says take action. Really easy to do. But you don't have to send these things. A lot of people, I think, do it because if you can't do anything else, that's what I tell people to do for federal advocacy. Also, you can look around in the state and try to find different outlets, multiple outlets with different perspectives, and then ask questions. Yeah. And that's another way. Vote. Go vote in your local elections. I have a hard time remembering it's time to vote on something when it's an off year.
Pay attention to your school board and ask questions of your school board. I spend time, I know it's easier for me because of my background, but I spend time on the special education committee with the Board of Education in my district, and so that I can just stay on top of what our actual district is doing and what the people's beliefs and philosophies are, just to help make sure that kids with disabilities are advocated for and have a voice where they wouldn't have a voice otherwise.
Right. And I think one of the things I think we all need to do, I just wrote a letter to I sent an email to our NDSC Advocacy Coalition, NDAC. And one of the things I put in there, I can't remember the wording exactly now, but it was a word, civility. I have a blog that doesn't get much attention these days, but I've written a lot about civility.
What's the name of that blog?
The sassy Southern
Yeah,
gal.
I saw that one.
Yes.
Yeah,
It
I
doesn't
was going to ask you about that.
Yeah, it used to get a lot of love, but as Rachel's gotten older, it doesn't get as much love. But I blogged a lot about our experiences in a respectful way, I hope. I have my favorite, one of my favorites is something called Shakespeare and that inclusion thing. When Rachel went to high school, somebody asked me how I got, number one, they said, how'd you get Rachel in general education? And I said, well, the law says so. So that's what we did.
Yeah.
And then somebody else said, why would you want her in general education? Because she'll have to read Shakespeare. And I was like, well, that's kind of the point, you know. Well, Rachel loves Shakespeare. And they came to, this is the time when the teachers had higher expectations than I did. They came to me and wanted to learn Shakespeare monologues. And I said, you do remember that she has Down syndrome and working memory is a problem? And they said, we do, but we think she can do this. Well, one of the things in IDEA is that you make accommodations and modifications for students.
Yeah.
I don't remember that. I can't believe I've forgotten the exact terminology in the law, but it says that a child with a disability should be in the same environment as a non-disabled child, and you utilize all supports, aids, you have to exhaust all of that before you segregate them into another classroom. Okay. So Rachel did have an accommodated speech, but she gave Shakespeare monologues, and it was hilarious because she would do it in character in her room and act like she was British. So the teachers she did great. She loved it, and she can tell you about Romeo and Juliet, and can she tell you the plot of all this stuff? No, but she can tell you enough to have a general conversation with you, which is part of why you want students to do that. And then she was Straight-O and Julius Caesar. Rachel's a theater girl, and she was Straight-O and Julius Caesar. And I thought, oh my gosh, that sounds horrible to be in Julius Caesar. But her theater teacher thought that she could do it. She did it. She was great. She had all kinds of people that came to watch her in it. She just wanted to be a part of the theater program, and they included her. And I tell you, those students really understood the assignment. They didn't have to do this. They reached out to me, some of them, and said, hey, we want you to be in the know about what's going on with Rachel, because it's harder for Rachel might come home and tell me we're having a pizza party today after school, and it may be a pizza party 3 weeks from now. And a lot of kids can mix that up, but it's a little bit harder for me. But anyhow, I have never liked Shakespeare, but you know what? Through Rachel's experience, even Mom came to like Shakespeare a little. And that's what that blog talks about. I don't remember what we were talking about when we got off on that. Getting involved in advocacy. Yeah. The school board and school election is a great way. Being on committees at school, being in PTO, PTA, or whatever you have going on at your school, and speaking up and saying, when you're going to play dodgeball, well, how's that going to impact the kids with disabilities? Are they going to be able to play? Yeah. Speak up. It is so helpful to our population when somebody, you know how tiring it gets to always have to be asking people to do stuff for you. It really gets old. But the other thing I would say is civility is what we were talking about. You know, it is not helpful to go on social media and say mean things to politicians. For example, if a politician posts a picture and it has someone with Down syndrome in it, and you're mad at them because they're not doing what you want them to do, and you say ugly things about the person with Down syndrome and that politician, that's not helpful. No. It's not going to help you as an advocate. And we tell our advocates, you can say whatever you want to say. But guess what? Somebody in that office is probably reading that, and that may impact your ability to be able to advocate. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so I talk about that a lot. In fact, I'm kind of known for that in the community. You know, they'll say, now Jawanda's going to get on to you because she always says you can catch more flies with honey than vinegar, and you can. Also, remembering that every elected official, there's no elected official that's going to do everything you want them to every time. Yeah. And we don't have time to worry about the things that they didn't do. We have to focus on the things that we need done, especially in the disability community. We have gotten through social media and so many other things where we have become so polarizing. It's not healthy for anyone. And we need to figure out a way that we can meet. And we used to, and I still say this a lot, we can agree to disagree and move on. And I think we do need to do that. But I also think we need to stop and listen. And, you know, when you hear that you want less big government, so you hear that they're going to cut money from Medicaid, or they're going to move this or do that. You have your right to that opinion, and that may be your leaning. But sit down and search and find out, how is this going to impact somebody with a disability? How is this going to impact a mom, a single mom? How is this going to impact immigrants? How is this going to... God created all these people in his image, and God created Rachel perfectly as she is. Yeah. She does not need fixed, but she does need people. She and all these other people with Down syndrome and disabilities do need people to love them with their actions. Can I give you one example from my Sunday school class?
Sure, go for it.
Okay.
I mean, that's part of one of our next questions anyways, so go for it.
And Tracy and I both could talk about things that we might do better in all churches to include people, not just people with disabilities, but that is certainly an area we need to work on. I jokingly say the old women's Sunday school class, but I'm in a ladies' Sunday school class that I love. And I share with them some of the struggles we have, and one of our struggles has been transportation. Rachel can't drive. She's probably never going to drive. My husband is advocating for driverless cars. She works at a hospital, the University of Kansas Health System. She wouldn't want me to say that. They've been an amazing employer. They understand the assignment on employing people with disabilities. Sure. But she works at the front door of the main hospital, which is 23 miles from my front door in traffic. And they've been great because they accommodated her hours, but it's still 23 miles there, 23 miles back. I have a demanding job, My husband travels quite a bit, but we have to get her there and get her home. So twice a day, 46 miles in traffic, we get to do that. Anywhere Rachel needs to go, if we can't take her, and a lot of times people don't think, because most 26-year-olds drive themselves places. Mm-hmm. So they plan things, and they don't think, Rachel's parents going to be able to get her there. It's great when people say, hey, I'll come pick up Rachel. Her Sunday school teachers do that sometimes. They don't live close by. But there's a person in our Sunday school class that I did not even know very well before I joined the class, and she'll be embarrassed because I'm going to use her name. Her name is Phyllis. And not long after I started being in that Sunday school class and she heard that we had this need, she said, hey, I can help with Rachel sometimes if you need me to. Well, I try to use that sparingly, but I cannot tell you how much that meant to me. I didn't have to ask. She came to me and said she's retired. And of course, it doesn't always work out. And then we have other friends. We have a couple other friends in the church who have also done that. It's hard on scheduling, though, because Rachel needs to go and they need to go. Phyllis is retired. Mm-hmm. She has picked her up and taken her to work multiple times. She's helped us. I had bunion surgery. She helped us out with that. I didn't have to ask. She just offered and did it. That is being the hands and feet of Jesus. And that is something when you start thinking about, is there somebody else in our church that needs that and I could do that for them? And maybe it's something else. Maybe it's not transportation. But I'm not joking when I say you get weary and you get tired of always having, families with disabilities will say, I get tired of always having to try to prove that my child belongs. And that can be true. But that's just a great example, I think, of somebody being the hands and feet of Jesus.
Yeah, that was part of my next question was like, how can BVC, Blue Valley Church, keep our church accessible, but how can we minister to people in the disability community? So that's a good example of people doing that, of us doing something well. What are some things that maybe we could do?
Some other things that would really be helpful is we have the opportunity for people to come alongside a child with disability on a Sunday morning and be a buddy that kids can go to Sunday school independently and parents can go to Sunday school independently. Yeah. That is a really big need for parents, especially because church is the place where they often get rejected because they're not handled or not. They don't have the ability to handle all the education and support that comes with that, or they just don't want to. And so families get asked to leave church often, hopefully not at Blue Valley, but I
don't think so.
Yeah, but come alongside and be a buddy so that families can go to Sunday school. Also, if you see a family that maybe is struggling, offer help. I think that is probably the thing I've heard the most is I just wish somebody would offer to take our kids sometime. I just want a Friday night to myself. And it might be a Friday night to go back and take a nap. But that's what they want is just some time off because when we're at church and we're taking care of kids with disabilities or you're at school, we do that and then we send them home. We send them home to parents that don't get a break. It's a 24/7 job. So offering respite for those families would just be a huge blessing to those families.
Yeah.
So those are two ways that we can really be a lot more friendly and open and supportive for kids with disabilities.
Have we had a respite night?
So we have partnered with the main respite 501c3 in our area to do that. We haven't done that in a while. They come in and they use our building and we're not really a participant. We're just a facility. We also have a partnership with 99 Balloons, which is in Northwest Arkansas, and they provide all the tools for you to conduct your own respite night. We have a partnership with them and we've been trying to get one on the calendar, but currently I really need another director to help me with that. I am not in a spot where I can lead that right now. So if there's somebody out there who would like to take that on and help me direct that evening, it's very simple. It's low key. It would only be for about 3 to 5 kids, probably the first one. But that would be an opportunity that we're ready to go with. We just need some helpers. Yeah. So, yes and no. Yes, we've had a respite, but not our own.
Yeah. I mean, that would be 3 to 5 families, though, that are impacted, right?
Yes. Yes. That would probably cry because they would be so happy.
Yeah.
So, yes.
And giving parents that option, maybe you're in a Sunday school class or know a family that has a child with a disability and offering, hey, I know y'all would like to go out on a date or that you just like to have a night to yourself, we'll take your kids. But also not just doing things for people, but asking. Rachel, my daughter, is 26, and she does not want you to do things for her. I laugh and say her first words are, I do myself, mommy, which is not far from the truth. But, and families are the same way. And that can be tricky. I'm pretty out there. I'm pretty much an open book, but not everybody is that way. So just kind of being careful not to just assume that somebody wants something, to kind of navigate that carefully. I also know, and Tracy didn't mention this, but just adapt. We also in our church need to do some work on accessibility of facilities.
Sure.
And that costs money.
Yeah.
So that costs money. So if somebody's got a lot of money laying around and that's something they want to do, I'm sure Tracy
we're not
could.
talking just playgrounds, right?
No. Like this has been like when I first started, but I welcomed a family in who had a little boy that used a walker to navigate the halls. And that was the first time I had really walked down our halls through the eyes of somebody in a mobility device. And as soon as I started walking down the hall, I said to myself, they are never coming back because our carpet had rolls in it that made it hard to navigate. Okay. Our classrooms are super tiny, and it's very difficult to navigate if you're using any sort of mobility device, whether it's wheelchair, walker, anything. So those two things are really hard. And then we have lots of stairs, and that's also very difficult. And then playgrounds are an issue. Yeah. We don't have a playground space currently any longer. So that is another thing that could be another podcast, but I don't want to talk about that.
I don't believe our choir space is accessible. Is it? Is there a ramp?
There's a ramp from the elevator to the fellowship hall to the choir space.
Okay.
There are stairs or tiers.
It would be a little it'd be a little challenging to navigate, but
sitting in the front row or off to the side would be the way to do that.
Right. It would be, that's a little bit challenging, not great. You can make it work, not great. One of the big mantras in the disability community is nothing about us without us. And what that means is, we're sitting here and none of us have a disability that I know of. Okay. Well, we probably do, but anyhow, that we want to include people with disabilities in our discussions and ask them, what do you want?
Yes.
And look around our church, and not everybody has a visible disability, but look around, talk, listen. Do we have people with disabilities in our church? We really don't have that many, probably, if you think about it. And that's not an indictment on our church, okay? There's probably a lot of people there who have disabilities that we don't know about. But we want to see people with disabilities in our churches and see them included. And I think it would be great if we had a Sunday that we focused on disability. And in my big dream world, even partner with some of the other churches here. I know some of the other churches do some conferences from time to time. One of Tracy's favorites and one of my favorite speakers' name is Eric Carter. And his emphasis, he is the head of, I can't remember the name of it. He was at Vanderbilt, but he's now at Baylor as the head of their disability studies department. And they're really putting a focus on faith and disability. And I had the opportunity to speak on a panel not a panel, but at a conference with him once. And I thought I had died and arrived.
I was so jealous.
Yes. Yeah. He was at our convention this year. Really amazing man who has done a lot of research in this area. I would love it if our community, not just our church, but you got to work with other people. And other churches may be providing something that we can't. And that's okay. Try to work with those churches. And I know we have done that. I know Tracy has really tried to partner with others. So there's different ways that you can help include people. But look around and think, who do we have with disabilities and how could we include them? And maybe sometime we need to let some of them speak to us or bring in other, speakers to talk about this issue. So
that sounds great. Well, we haven't exhausted this topic, but it has been almost an hour. So I just want to say thank you, Jawanda, for joining us on the podcast today. This is a hugely important topic. And again, looking into it, my own ignorance I was like, wow, I really have no idea what's going on in this world. So thank you for sharing all of this stuff and sharing all the stories. Those are hugely important for me.
Can I say thank you? Thank you to you, Tracy, Derek, our staff, our church, for allowing me to do this. It's something I'm really, really passionate about. And I'm going to go back 26 years and tell you I didn't know anything about disability. Very, very little. And what I knew was not real positive. And so I literally, after I got my prenatal diagnosis on a Monday morning, we went to see my doctor, came home, and I looked in the mirror and said, okay, you need to get over this pity party, Jawanda. You wanted to find out, you found out, and now you need to get to work. Now, I've had a lot of pity parties since then, and I highly encourage pity parties. Just don't stay stuck in one.
Yeah.
But you know what? I didn't know any of this stuff either. And I learned, and I truly believe that God has a purpose in all of our paths. And I believe what I do now is just a perfect match for my personality and my life experiences. I look back and laugh because I think, ooh, I thought God was doing this in my life. And I look back and realize so many of the things that have happened in my life were preparing me for this.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
Amazing.
You said something on one of your blog posts, I think it was, that you received that prenatal diagnosis and then you went home and prepared for an adventure.
It's been an
adventure of life with Rachel, right? And I've had some friends who had babies, and I heard this from someone else. I didn't come up with this, but you spend 9 months planning. It's almost like you're planning for a trip to Alaska, but then the baby's born, and all of a sudden you realize you had a ticket for Hawaii. You're like, I wasn't prepared for this. But you went home and you prepared.
Well, it took a bit.
Yeah.
It's a bit of a shock, but I was in a really good place where we had a great church in Memphis.
Good support system.
Great support system. And I worked for a place called Youth Villages that still exists, and it's much bigger now. And we served some really tough populations, kids that had been kicked out of schools, foster kids, and I was a volunteer manager. And the department I worked in, the people were just amazing. And we had amazing friends. We had a great Sunday school class there. In fact, they were so helpful that my husband had cancer at the same time. My husband was 34 years old and had colorectal cancer. So that I got that. He got his tumor removed one day, and the next day is when my doctor called me to tell me my baby had Down syndrome.
Okay.
But
You really had a week.
It was I said, I trust God, but I'm going to have a little discussion about this at some point. But so it was a really, really, it was a really, really hard time. You knew so much less about Down syndrome and abilities and stuff back then, but it was really a challenging time. But God put really just wonderful, wonderful people. And we had this great early intervention program. I had no idea, how great it was at the time. There's been a lot of really, really hard things. I fought for Rachel to have what she had, but she wouldn't have had what she had if not for the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. That was a total game changer for us and for people with disabilities. But yeah, it was really hard, but we made it through, and we've got Rachel, who is full of life, love, stubbornness, just like everybody else. People think kids with Down syndrome are always happy, and that's not true. They're just like everybody else. So anyhow, I really went off on that. So
well, remind us again, of your organization's website, where they can find helps on those sites. So.
Okay, it's the National Down Syndrome Congress. It is ndsccenter.org. And we have a new website, so I don't have it totally memorized, but there's a section on policy and advocacy. And if you click on that, you'll see an envelope or like a file system of different things. And one of those is action alerts. You can also click on there and find a lot of resources about how to advocate and policy briefs like this FAQ we've just done on moving OSEP, the Office of Special Education Programs, out of the U.S. Department of Education.
Cool.
So,
well, thank you so much for joining us for the podcast. I really do appreciate it, and I'll put a link to that website and some of those the action alerts in the description for the podcast, so people can get on those. And thanks, Tracy, for joining us and sharing.
Always good.
Yeah, awesome.
We have a jewel in her. She's great.
Thank you.
We're blessed to have her.
Anyways. Thank you so much for being here, and thanks for listening. And until next time, go serve your king.